So let's talk about specific, the way to approach the test after you've approached a practice session. My personal belief, and I know there's people that disagree with me, but I mean, this is the way I've always taught, everything I've taught and everything I've coached, and I've had a lot of success doing it. And research supports what I'm saying. You may well do something different despite the fact that you're not doing what scientifically is the best stuff, but that doesn't mean it's the best stuff. So for those of you who are marginally talented, and there's a lot of us out there like that, my suggestion is that you, instead of randomly do things, you think about what I'm going to tell you right now. Task numbers 1, 6, and 8 are basically just nothing but false casting. Task 1 is a pickup and false cast, and you should try to get it as horizontal or as vertical as you can. Even though it doesn't state that in the test, you need to be pretty clearly vertical, because most examiners don't want you over here. They want you more like 20 degrees off. 6 is the same thing. It's vertical to horizontal, so it's again just false cast. 8 is the same thing. It's just nothing but slow, and then medium, and then fast. So they're just false casts. All three of those belong to the same family. They are the fundamental parts of casting. In addition to that, what I would do every session, in addition to 1, 6, and 8, I would work on off-shoulder casts, and I would work on dominant shoulder casts at 20, 30, and 45 feet. As a matter of fact, I would work on a dominant cast at 50 feet because task number 19 asks you to do a cast at 50 feet without any haul. So that can be a little bit intimidating and daunting if you haven't done it. So false casting is 1, 6, 8, and all of the accuracy casts. That's false casting. I wouldn't worry about the distance cast, for instance. Everybody just freaks out about the distance cast. This is the same as everything else. You fail the distance, heck, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's one fail. If you fail task 4 and task 7, you won't even get to the distance. So the distance is not something I would spend a lot of time on. Plus, it's going to be easier to get to the distance. For instance, if you can cast 50 feet with one hand with 3-foot loops, you're going to have zero, and you do task number 14, which is the double haul, you're going to have absolutely no problem doing task number 15, which is a 75-foot distance. It's just not going to be an issue because you've got the fundamentals built in. If, on the other hand, you go out to do task 15, and you're just cranking it and doing horribly at it, all you're doing is practicing failure. You're practicing bad habits. Stay away from that unless you're a natural distance caster. And I tell you, most CI candidates now are older gentlemen, for the most part, who have been fly fishing for quite some time, and now they're retiring and they want to get into this CI task. Hey, that's all well and good, but the bottom line is most of them haven't really done a very good job of learning how to distance cast effectively and smoothly. So again, I would suggest forget about that. Then start working on the tasks that have to do with a presentation task at the end of a false casting. So for instance, 4 and 5, you're going to pick up false cast, and then you're going to make a reach bend left, and on 5 you're going to make a reach bend right. On task number 7, you're going to false cast, and then you're going to make some slack line casts with and without an aerial mend. And then of course the accuracy is all about false casting. And then you're going to add accuracy into it and feeding line, extending line as you go from 20 to 30 and 30 to 45. So all those tasks are very much related. When you get all that done, and roll cast you can work in anytime you want to, but it's again going to be a specific cast that's sort of outside of the realm of the other ones. When you get done with all those, then you've got good loops. Now you work on your double haul. When you get that done, then you work on your distance cast. That's the order I would do it in. When I have a student, there are times we do not work on distance for the first 6 to 8 or 10 weeks, maybe 3 or 4 months sometimes, because I know they're not going to do it and they're just going to get frustrated. So why not work on good loops at 45 and 50 feet, good double hauls, and then they're going to feel pretty good because it's not that hard to go from a 50-foot single-handed cast to a 75-foot cast if you've got a good double haul and a good loop with 50 feet with one hand. Then it's pretty simple. The teaching parts, I would start doing a lot of teaching in the meantime. And man, I would just start teaching. Even if you're not really familiar with how to teach, just find somebody to teach. I think that's going to be hugely important, and we're going to talk more about that before we get to task at the beginning, before we get to task 16, which is the first teaching task. But get out there and find somebody to teach. And don't worry too much about when you start doing those teaching tasks. You can preview them and start working on them as you're doing some of the other stuff, tasks 1 through 15. But the biggest thing is you need to start teaching, because then you're going to be able to answer questions authentically instead of just, parenthetical. Well, I think this is how I would do it. That's death. You don't want to be saying this is how I might teach somebody. You want to say this is how I would teach somebody. So we'll get more into that in a minute. Every single day, tasks 1, 6, and 8 and false casts 20, 30, and 45 feet and 50 feet off of this shoulder, and if you're a right-handed caster, and 20, 30, and 45 feet off of this shoulder if you're a right-handed caster, and switch it around obviously if you're a left-hander. But those are something I do every single day as part of my warm-up, and then in the drills. So let's talk about the last things you need to do. A, you need to be ready for questions. So you really need to understand casting mechanics. So you need to know those 5 essentials, or at least your view of those 5 essentials. You've got to be able to answer questions. If in task number 1 somebody asks you what causes a narrow loop, you should be able to say a straight line rod tip path. If you start mumbling around, that's going to be bad. You need to have very simple, short, quick answers. Straight line, what causes a tailing loop? A dip in a straight line, a dip below the straight line rod tip path, period. That's it. Then you're going to ask them, you're going to force them to ask you another question. In other words, okay, well, what causes a dip in a rod tip path? And you could say, well, it could be a shortened casting arc caused by creep, or it could be an inappropriate application of power. It could be a cast in the front and the back that are less than 180 degrees from each other. So that's the kind of thing. Then they might ask you another question. Well, why does creep cause a tailing loop? Then you're going to answer that question. But don't just go off the rails and start talking. So you need to practice that, and you need to figure out, put stuff on a 3x5 card. Hey, what are the possible questions for task number 1? The possible questions are bing, 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 and bing. These are the kinds of questions somebody might ask me. And then answer those questions very succinctly, very concisely, and directly as you possibly can, and wait for them to ask you a next question. Don't start just throwing a bunch of stuff on a barn door and hoping that you stick something, because you're going to get yourself in trouble. So that's the first thing. And if you go through the FFI study guide, you're going to see a lot of those questions. Those questions are going to be in there. These are the questions that 90% of the examiners are going to ask you. Be prepared for those questions. Study those questions. Have friends ask you. Anytime you get a chance, do that. The other, when you think you're ready, get yourself somebody to go out and give you a pretest and tell them not to be nice to you. Hey, a euphemism for you're really crappy is, well, that was pretty good. Hey, pretty good is probably going to fail the test. I can tell you is if you think you're going to need a good day to pass the test, you're not going to have a good day to pass the test, because the stress of watching 3 MCI examiners test you is going to blow up any chance you had. I mean, unless you're just a very unusual creature, it's not going to happen. So you need to be so well prepared that even at 90%, you're going to pass that test. You can't afford to be at 80% and hope you have a 90% day. That's very unlikely it's going to happen. It's going to help if you can answer questions really easily and very smoothly and with total confidence. That's going to really help, so make sure you can do that. Read other books. Make sure there's tons of books out there by lots of casting authors. Some really good ones, and lots of casting books available. The other thing too is there's a couple of books that I would highly recommend you read. One is Practice Perfect by Lemoff, and we'll put this in at the end so you can see it, but Practice Perfect by Lemoff. It's a great book. What it does, it explores 7 or 8 different coaches from around the world who have had unbelievable success. I mean, a tennis coach in Russia and a golf coach in South Korea who have, like for instance, the tennis coach in Russia has 12 of the top 25 women tennis players in the world in her club. The same thing with the golf coach, or some club coach in Brazil who has 15% of all the English professional soccer players came from his club. And every one of them is practicing the same type of system. Even though they don't know each other, they've just discovered that this is the best way to teach. Man, I would read that book and I would digest it, and I would try to use that as a way to learn to teach yourself how to learn. And the other one I would really suggest is the Talent Code by Doyle. The Talent Code by Doyle. It's an outstanding book that it debunks the idea of muscle memory. There is no such thing as muscle memory, although we certainly can call it that because we kind of understand what we're talking about. but it goes into exactly how people learn physical skills. And if you read that book and you extrapolate into how you can change the way you think about teaching and learning physical skills, it can be an immensely helpful resource for you. And the last one, Fred Jones is a educational psychiatrist, psychologist who's done tons of teacher training. He's got a lot of different materials out there, and I can't recommend highly enough his books. Any one of them is going to help you tremendously in how do people learn, how do you set up lesson plans, how do you organize practice sessions, that kind of stuff. It's not all about casting, obviously, it's about teaching in schools, but it's the same principles that apply. So you basically have two choices here. You can approach this and do the same old stuff that somebody was doing in 1992. Or you can decide, hey, there's been a lot of research in the last 30 years. I mean a lot of research in the last 30 years that has debunked a whole lot of things that people used to do. People used to have success and still do have success using suboptimal tactics and systems just because there's some people that are talented. They're going to win and they're going to perform well despite bad teaching, not because of it. So my suggestion is that you do some research, you think about some of the stuff that's going on, and look at some of the studies and read some of these books. And there's a big list of books inside the FFI study guide. You can pick up those too, and a bunch of, like I think we put in there the dirty dozen of teaching, some basic principles of teaching that are similar to the principles of casting. So I hope this helps. I hope it gives you something to think about. I think this is one of those things that if you systematically approach this and you're willing to execute some self-control and self-discipline, you can pass this test regardless of where you are right now. And I'm hoping this helps. If it doesn't, then I don't know what to tell you other than find yourself a mentor for sure. And also give me a call or write me a note and ask questions. I'd be more than happy to answer them.